Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the British Embassy. My name is Terry McVinnis. I have the privilege of serving as the chairman of the board for the Washington branch of the Royal Aeronautical Society. I want to first thank the British Embassy for hosting our event, and in particular, of course, Dame Karen Pierce, the ambassador from the British ambassador to the U.S. And really, our point of contact for the week is Chris Cullion. Where's Chris? There you are, Chris. Chris is, make sure I get this right, the flight lieutenant of the British Defense Staff here in the United States. So thanks, Chris, for all the work that you've done in helping us get this set up. For those of you that are familiar with the Royal Aeronautical Society, it was founded in 1866 in London. And of course, it's changed a lot over the years. Society now has over 20,000 members around the world. It has become an international disciplinary professional institution dedicated to the aerospace community. Our particular branch here in the United States was founded on the December 17th of 2003, which is a very momentous date in aviation history because it was the 100th anniversary of manned flight up by the Wright brothers. I failed extemporary speaking in high school, so I'm trying to do this without a podium. But similar to the mission of our home office in London, our mission here with the Washington branch is to stimulate advances in aviation safety and technology, and we do that by providing a forum to improve and further the technical, political, and social interchange between the U.S. and the UK and aviation industry. And we're working very hard now to continue to bring value to our aviation community through events such as tonight by building a learning community, a learning society, if you will, that enhances your knowledge, deepens your understanding, and we do that by building some strong connections between all of us and by developing learning partnerships that we hope will bring value to you in your day-to-day activities as well as here tonight. It'll help you in your decision making. So we're really striving to make that happen. And we've got a great evening in store for you tonight. But in addition to the all-star panel you'll hear from shortly, I do want to acknowledge a couple of special guests we have in the audience. First of all, is Katie Thompson, the Deputy Administrator from the FAA. Thank you for being here. The Honorable Todd Inman, from board member from the NTSB. And James Viola, President and CEO of the Vertical Aviation International. The strength of our branch is really based on our members, and I'm happy to say that our membership roles continue to grow, have so since for over a year now in the post-COVID environment. So we're really happy to continue to build the membership here with our branch. If you're not a member, I know there's a number of you here that aren't members, it's really easy to become a member. You can go to our website, or Shelley Seamy, right here, is our membership coordinator and director, and she'll be happy to do what's needed to do what she needs to do to get you registered. She can probably do that this evening or over the next couple of days. And on the subject of membership, I do want to give a special shout out to our corporate sponsors. Boeing and Airbus are both corporate sponsors of ours, as is Rolls-Royce. We've got Matt McVicker here from Rolls-Royce in the back. Thank you, Matt. From Raytheon, we've got George Vergara here. George, where are you? There he is in the back. And from GE Aviation, Evan Kostecki, who's also in the back. And without the generous support from those corporate sponsors, we wouldn't be able to bring you a program like this tonight, so we really thank them for their support. So thanks. So enough of me talking. I'm going to now turn things over to the moderator of tonight's panel, Ken Quinn, who is also a member of our board of directors. Ken, so.
All right, thanks, Terry. We're going to have some fun tonight. We're bringing you the finest collection of formerly important FAA and NTSB officials. On the left, my good buddy, Randy Babbitt, former Senior Vice President of Labor Relations at Southwest Airlines. Before that, the FAA Administrator, I think the 14th FAA Administrator. Before that, the President and CEO of the Airline Pilots Association. He was with ECLAC Consulting, Oliver Wyman. He's been on the bank board and Eastern Airlines pilot, I think, originally. Should I ask you about Frank Lorenzo tonight? Or? Okay, all right. He's happily residing in Lakeside in Virginia, Lake Anna. Next to him, I'll jump over to Robert Sumwalt, good mate, director of Boeing's Aerospace and Aviation Safety Center at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. That's a really big title. That's a mouthful. But you were chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board for 5 years. 4 years. You were at NTSB for 14 years and 11 months. You couldn't just stay one more month. Okay, he's also a CBS news analyst. So we now have a pundit on our, okay, all right, on the panel. That's good. So we got the media part. I think you were an ALPA rep to some accidents. You were a US Air, not Waze, pilot. Oh, let's get this going. And a man with wonderful ties back to the Gamecocks of South Carolina, a great grandfather, I think, a founder of the wonderful University of South Carolina. Lirio Leo, this thing keeps coming in and off. 31 years at FAA, young pup engineer out on the West Coast. Been kind of in everything at FAA. The head of the Seattle Aircraft Cert Office. She was deputy regional administrator. She's been the acting deputy associate administrator for aviation safety. She's been the senior rep in Paris. Tough job for 4 years. Executive director of rulemaking. We have a director of rulemaking here with us, Yvette Rose. She was in the safety ops of commercial space and executive director of the Office of International Affairs. And then she wound up being executive director of aircraft certification. And she just retired just a few months ago, resident now of Angers-Sommet in France. So, and now advising a number of folks in AAM, Advanced Air Mobility. So we're interested to hear that. Speaking of which, we have Billy Nolan, who is now the head of regulatory affairs at Archer Aviation, which is doing eVTOL, interesting aircraft, Midnight, I think it's called. Former acting administrator of the FAA, former associate administrator for aviation safety, former head of safety at ALPA, former head of safety at Qantas, former head of safety at WestJet. Hard to hold down a job here. 26 years at American Airlines as a pilot and instructor and head of helping them on their regulatory front. So I know all these folks pretty well, consider them friends, but I went to the ultimate source, LinkedIn, right, for all things, where everyone says they're honored and humbled to brag about themselves. And so Billy's was really good. You know how you get endorsers? So you get some people can endorse you on LinkedIn. So Billy, you only have two. One of which said, Billy Nolan is well-respected, well-liked, and knowledgeable. I don't really know Billy and have never met him. But I know people who know him. So please, if someone who actually knows Billy could endorse him, I think it might help his career. All right, so some ground rules. We got underachievers. They're prepared for the withering cross-examination about to befall them. I'm like the parish priest, so if I see you on your cell phones, I'm likely to call on you. I reserve that right as a moderator to call on you and ask you a good question. No speeches, but you may interrupt at any time. Raise your hand. I'll bring a mic over. Ask a question yourself at any time. We're not going to wait until the end. Join in the conversation. By the way, this session will be recorded, so you just all consented to this show. So, Lirio, set the stage. Where do we stand right now in aviation safety, not just in the United States, but I would also challenge you, is it the case that the safest countries are getting safer and the less safe countries are getting less safe?
Okay, I'm going to start off with the microphone. Does it work? Can you hear me well enough?
Push the button. Push the button. Yep.
Is it working out? There's better. I'm gonna say, I've been in the panel seat before when Ken's there, and you can never know what you're gonna expect. So that wasn't the question that he was gonna ask, but it's fine. So maybe start over. Where do I see safety at this point? Having just retired from the FAA, I actually think, and I think we've talked a little bit about it as we prep for this. I'm not sure where it's gonna go, but I think the biggest thing we see is there's a lot of heightened security, heightened scrutiny right now in the media. And I don't know that that's the reality of what we see in safety. I think that there's a lot of not complete, accurate information being characterized, which I think gives a misperception of where we are in the safety field. What's interesting, there was just a recent article that I think many of us may have seen that MIT just came out with, but I know that in the Aviation Safety Organization, which I was a part of for a period of time, we looked at what was the actual fatality rate on a regular basis. And it was always really comforting to us to know that we were continuing to drive that down. And I think the MIT study that was recently published showed that there is a 1 in 13.7 million passenger boardings chance that you would have a fatality. And you're seeing that, and that's worldwide. So if you ask the question, is the United States safe and other countries are going to be unsafe? I think overall, we're starting to progress. It's clear. I mean, we've done it. We've doubled that in the last 10 years. Because in 2008 to 2017, I think the number was something in the 8 million passenger boardings. So you're starting to see that improvement. I don't think that people that are not familiar with aviation understand the complexity of the aviation system to understand that it really, really is so safe when you're seeing an event occur, what that event means when you put it in perspective. I mean, how does that fit in the overall system? And what does that mean? So I'm a real optimist. I always have been. I always think there's a way to find a solution. I really feel optimistic about what we've done in the past with the safety record, because when I was in the safety organization, there was the challenge quite a ways back that said reduce the fatal accident rate by 50% every 10 years. It was the commercial aviation safety team that really set that bar. And at that time, they said there was no way. How do we get there? But the intent of that was because you saw the continued increase in activity. If you kept having the same accident rate, then you were going to have numbers that were going to be inappropriate for the public perception.
So Robert, if we're so damn safe, why is everyone scared to death to fly? Or so many people, not this room.
I'm going to say social media has a lot to do with that. Delta had an unfortunate situation yesterday. 2 people killed in the maintenance in the tire shop. And there's people that are out saying another Boeing problem. I read that. The social media is just, they don't confuse me with the facts. They're going to take something and blow it way out of proportion. So I think that's one reason right there, Ken.
Is it a media perception problem, Billy? Or is it, why aren't we getting the facts out? Are we being overwhelmed by pundits speculating about accidents instead of guys like you talking on television and setting the record straight?
Transparency is a good thing, right? If you go back, so by the time we closed the record books on this year, there would have been 40 million flights flown on a global basis. 40 million. So you just think about, over a year's time, we've moved, nearly a quarter of the world's population. So when you put that all in perspective, going back to Lirio's point and to Robert's point, it still comes down to our ability to educate the public in terms of what we see. US alone, 50,000 plus flights a day, and that's commercial flights. You've got 2.5 million people traveling every day. And all of them get to and from their destination absolutely safe day in, day out. But when you have something happen, rightfully so, we have gotten so safe that we are now at the point where we are saying we want to eliminate the close calls. And that's not a bad place to be. Now, it means that, yes, because you don't see things, and suddenly, my analogy is if I were to throw a black spot on the screen behind you, you'd see it because, it's one little dot on a white background. In some ways, that's how we sort of see incidents that happen today, right? Something has happened, we immediately think, oh my God, the system is coming apart or it's not safe. And that it's anything but, it's quite resilient.
So, Randy, we'll talk further about it, but we had a flight depart, was it PDX, gets to 16,000 feet. It has a door plug fly out, doesn't hurt anybody. pilot turns around, lands, nobody's physically hurt, and it's a big whoop-to-do, and it grounds the airplane. Fair? Unfair?
Premature. I would like to look a little further into what really happened quickly. You can order inspections quickly. We've all seen, no more than 25 hours, and this has got to be looked at. You can't just operate. That could have been, you don't need to ground them to do that. But all of these things, I think people, it's been mentioned, social media, other components. 38,000 people are going to die this year on the highways. And none of them, unless, it's your hometown, it's going to make the front page. But if somebody dies in an airplane anywhere, and it's going to make the front page, and it's just the nature of the business.
But why does it lead to grounding an airplane? Aren't you concerned that any incident or any accident is now going to lead to multi-billion dollars of damages and reputational damage to whoever the manufacturer is, and it's going to lead to a knee-jerk, maybe a political, media-fueled, maybe family-fueled reaction that's the new norm, ground?
I would segregate. My concern, if I was the FAA administrator at the time when this happened, is safety. I'm not really worried about your reputation. I'm worried about the people that are going to get in that airplane and fly. If Boeing wants to ground the airplane, say, "Whoa, we don't know what happened. We're going to just voluntarily ground our equipment." That's your decision. I think you should separate those two decisions.
Lirio, is FAA still the gold standard?
I think that, I don't think there's any standards that you want to compete on. I think that we do the leading activities in aviation. Our regulatory framework may be slow, but we still end up putting a regulatory framework that's got the right bar. I think not too high and not too low. It's gone through the public process, and I think we've achieved that over the past through all of the complex regulations from the certification of the operations and airports activities. There's so many overlapping regulations that we have in place. Our standards, I think, really do set the level where we want people to be. I think we mentioned, I don't want to say goals because it sounds, it's a term that people will throw around, but I think what we do is we don't want to compete. We've set up the right framework, and we are actually often leading, not by being the first out of the box, but by leading through designs.
First question from the audience, just ask pointed, critical, comma, isn't that correct?
I appreciate your leadership on the questions. Following that thread, do you think that there's a challenge with the FAA administrator inherently being a political appointee when dealing with the, let's say, duality of both having to manage aviation safety but also manage the public perception of aviation safety and how the administration deals with that?
I'll take a stab then. No, I don't think there's any incongruence or with the administrator being a political appointee. The administrator has a 5-year term, which is by design. It should be able to sort of transition across administration to the extent that there's a change. I think having the support, no matter who you are and what side of the aisle you sit on, to have the support, number one, from starting with the agency itself to the DOT and then to the White House, when you feel that you've got that kind of backing, it allows you to move out. And I certainly in the job, and I know it was in acting, I rose every day thinking, okay, what's the best I can do for the flying public, right? I never thought, what's the best I can do for the flying public? How will this play out on?
But Billy, if you look at Mike Whitaker, right? Wonderful man, steeped in experience in commercial aviation. Look at the talent that's on this platform. Generally speaking, an NTSB chair and an FAA administrator is not some political hack. Secretary of Transportation might have a political backing, might be a dividend from a campaign, and might influence a decision to ground an aircraft. Was that the case in the 787 grounding or 737 MAX, Lirio?
I don't think at all. I really think, in fact, you asked the question, I wanted to touch on it. I think that no grounding is premature or mature, it's appropriate when it happens. And I think you can have multiple people determine the right action. And in that case, we looked at pretty quickly when the aircraft was delivered, the design of the door, the event, and you can pretty much quickly deduce that it may have been a manufacturing issue. I think it's quick that you go through that assumption, and then at that point, together, working with industry, you make the right decision. Industry said, so if that's the case, let's be prudent, and there was action taken. The FAA doesn't necessarily just ground aircraft. What we'll do is we'll require a mandatory action that'll require an inspection. That inspection may require.
Why don't you do that in this case? Why don't you do mandatory inspections at the next significant overhaul, inspect any plugs that you've got, and just fix it? Don't ground the airplane.
You do it on an appropriate time frame based on risk and exposure, and it's a pretty well-standard process that we have, that there has been questions about it, but I think it has served us well as we look at certification activities and then also the operational activities, the environment it's operating in and all the factors. So I think that the action that was taken based on data and was appropriate at the time it was taken.
Billy, should we be worried that FAA has lost significant institutional knowledge because of COVID and retirements and shortage?
I think that's a challenge on a global scale to say, how do you keep pace? Clearly during the pandemic, we saw a lot of people that chose that time to do something different with their lives. I still think, I've always thought very highly of the agency. You've got highly skilled people right across, but the same thing happens out there for the airlines. And let me go back and just make one point. Airlines have to think day in and day out. Safety and quality are two sides of the same coin, which is your social license to operate. Without it, it falls apart. So, CEOs along with the FAA, are tasked with making an in-the-moment decision. Do I continue to fly? And do I keep my customers, give them a sense of comfort that this should be done? And in a way, this is what you're doing. I've been at 3 airlines now, and every one of those, that was a decision that you think, you wrestle with, you look at the data, but at the end of the day, it's a gut check. You say, should we do it? And in many cases, you do. But going back to the learning scale, I think they're talent. I think you've got to keep pace. Whether you're an agency, whether you're OEM, whether you're an airline, you have got to keep pace with technology because it is coming very fast, very furious, and our ability to keep pace with that is crucial.
I mean, it used to be a glass cockpit. A lot of the FAA inspectors really didn't have experience in glass cockpits. Now they're looking at eVTOL. What experience do they have? And it seems like we've had a successive group of managers over UAS that have left the agency because there's more lucrative opportunities in the private sector. True or not, Randy?
There's a lot of truth to it, but I think we should never accept that the FAA is a static organization. Every week, something new, it's going to make airplanes safer, it's going to make them lighter, it's faster, it's quieter. All of these innovations come out, and it's technology that we have to learn. We talked earlier, when you talk about certifying an airplane, certifying a DC-4, 50 years ago was one issue. If somebody built, a 797 tomorrow, it would have a lot of things that we've never even heard about, and therefore we don't have regulations necessarily or certification standards that would cover those. So, it's always evolving, and it will always be evolving in my imagination.
But how does the FAA certify something that it knows very little about?
Well, you have to take, and the process would probably, Lirio could probably do a better job than I will, but.
Okay, do a better job. Give her the mic. I'm done, go.
Certification of things that we've not seen before. Okay. I actually look at the fact that it's really exciting. So new technology, new operational concepts, they're all coming into play right now, and they're coming pretty quickly. But I think that even if you look a few years back, we were seeing UAS, small UAS coming in, they wanted to operate, we saw it as a challenge. I think we stepped up and we were able to build a regulatory framework that had the right touch for the right size of the risk and exposure. That was new to us. It meant a lot of change in mindset. I was doing the regulatory program at that time, and you really had to work with it and say, okay, it's a pilot, but is it really the same pilot? Does it need to have the same medical standards? So you change the paradigm based on what you see as the risk. So when you see that, at first it was this overwhelming challenge. I can't remember if you were part of that when that was occurring. Overwhelming challenge you look at, but we always seem, I think, within the FAA, and I'm an optimist, finding a way to step up to that challenge. We found a way, and UAS now, they're operating. We have Part 107 out there. We have a new rule that's already going to be published shortly that's going to expand those operations again. And I think you're going to see that we've made some real progress there. So I look at the UAM, the eVTOLs, which is electric vertical and takeoff, the hydrogen propulsion that may be looking, all this new technology. It's new, but it's not, and it's challenging, but it's not something that's unattainable for us. We have a framework, and I also feel like when I was in running the organization certification. Our engineers are bright as regulators, but they have to rely on the manufacturers that actually know the product they're doing to be able to do the showing for compliance. We will make the finding of compliance to the regulations. You set a standard, you put it out for public comment, you set a goal you think is appropriate to what you have currently in the new
Okay, well,
technologies
let's talk
coming
about
out.
attainability, Robert. I mean, the Air Navigation Conference of ICAO just ended today, I think. And in the last 24 hours, the SecGen and the president and lots of civil aviation leaders pledged not only the aspirational goals of sustainability, net zero by 2050, but 0 accidents by 2050 in international aviation. Is that attainable? Is that smart? Is that something we really should be doing? Please.
Well, you certainly have to set the goal there. I remember back in 1997 when the goal was set after a summit to have 0 accidents. And
That was David Hinson.
right, you know, you've got to set the goal, and the industry has done a pretty good job of moving in that direction. When was the last fatal crash?
Yeah, but we're going to be like doubling the traffic by then. Come on, is it really realistic?
Yeah, we've got to go for it. We've got to set that as goal, and we've got to attain that because the alternatives are not good at all.
You're going to put lawyers out of business, Billy.
Let me just revert one quick second to part of Lirio's. You know, I have absolute respect and admiration for the FAA, but this is more bigger than just the FAA, right? This is, you know, the society is a global society. So when you think about regulatory authorities, you know, we've got new and novel entrants in the audience here tonight, right? It is an expectation that regulatory authorities have to find ways to keep pace with technology. Now, we can clearly say technology can never come at the expense of safety. But that being said, you know, you've got engineers sitting there, you know, on CAD cams, and all of this stuff is electronic, and then you're tapping into an analog system. So that ability to find ways to continually advance the agency's knowledge around certification, around flight standards, and these are incredible people, but we have to continually evolve that. Now, on a global basis, I've always been a sort of a big data guy, Ken, which is the more we can leverage AI that's coming to its own, the more we can leverage machine learning, we could get to a place where you could wake up in the morning and say, what are my risks today? That's what I've looked at every day as an administrator.
To be clear, she has not played with her phone, but Katie's here, so we're going to put her on the spot. So data, have incidents increased, runway incursions, near misses? Do the data support kind of scaring the traveling public that we're up on incidents within the aviation system? Or is it just public's perception and the media reporting of it?
I didn't know whether I to join in this conversation, but no, I think to Billy's point is data is really key, and you look at trends overall, and sometimes you have increases, and we take action to intervene and identify what the source of the risk is, and take action to address and mitigate that risk. But data is an essential source of information, and looking proactively as opposed to looking in the rearview window to see where that risk is allows us as a regulatory agency and as an industry to better understand the source of the risk and proactively take action to mitigate or avoid that risk altogether. So I think it's essential. I think you can also get distracted by having too much data. But to Billy's point, I think there are tremendous opportunities to exercise AI to help us better digest, understand, and analyze the source of risk in the system.
Are incidents up or not?
Overall, no, they're not.
So, but it seems like the reporting is very different from that. But as to data, right? I mean, I must spend 45 minutes a day deleting emails, right? We just get too much thrown at us in writing. And are we just missing, Robert, human factors? Forget AI, forget big data. You've got a pile of it, MITRE, ASIAS, CAST. They're doing the predictive analytical work, but we have human factors issues. We've got pilots worried about a divorce. Their mom has dementia. People have alcoholism. They Flight attendant just complained to me the other day, and you saw the article, I think in the New York Times or Wall Street Journal. It's awful. I'm sleeping in my car. I'm not getting enough rest. Mental health issues that are still like 80% of the causes of accidents. Why are we talking about AI so much when mental health and human factors are far more important? Agree or disagree, Robert?
I think sometimes we do have to get back to basics, and I've said that for a long time now. We've got to get back to basics. I do want to go to something I mentioned, social media, but it's the media in general. Everybody has one or two of these in their pockets. Plus, we have doorbell cameras, we have security cameras everywhere. The tragedy that happened in Brazil a couple of weeks ago, that we all saw that, and numerous angles of that airplane in a flat span as it headed toward the ground. 30 years ago, the headline would have been, plane crash in Brazil kills 62 people. And that would have been it. But now we have these things that really are helping to put the fear of God to highlight every time, and that was more than a stumping of a toe. But if a wheel falls off of a United airplane, that's going to get in the news. By the way, they had the third one on Friday, I think. But we're going to have pictures of that. If a Callan comes off of a Southwest Airlines airplane, that's going to be in the media. So I think this.
Why is that news? And where does the NTSB get authority to investigate incidents and create another public spectacle that feeds the news media?
If you look in the legislation for the FAA, Section 49 USC 1131, and their authority, it does not mention the word accident. It mentions or incident. It mentions accident. The NTSB has long interpreted that to mean anything that affects transportation safety, and even if it does not meet the pure accident.
Is it because they don't have enough to do, that we don't have enough accidents, that they're now looking at incidents? And doesn't the FAA, Lirio, have an Office of Accident Investigation and Prevention that can adequately do a job to say the probable cause of this was the pilot who wanted to land on a taxiway, not on a runway? It's not really that difficult to figure out.
So the FAA's office is a liaison office. The NTSB has the authority for the probable cause. The FAA has the responsibility for clean operational safety. And so that office serves as a liaison, often a party to the investigation and working cooperatively. But just as we saw in the event that occurred recently, if we determine that there is an issue that we see that needs continued immediate action, within operational safety falls within the FAA, even before the probable cause may be addressed, because we're taking that action within our authority. So there's a good symbiotic relationship that we have, working together, and it has been successful in the past. But I want to go back to a question that you talked about. We finished it about technology. I think that what we're seeing, and it goes to maybe tying together the data. There's a lot of data out there. And I think what we're going to see as the FAA being able to keep pace, using the data, using our experience. It is a different way of thinking, but if you look at what we've seen in accidents, in events, and the pilot interaction, we can now, based on the technology, be able to intervene with the technology that can help that. So some things that we're seeing is the simplified vehicle operational concepts. You're actually trying to mitigate out the events that you've seen that have occurred, and actually do it through the design so that you can minimize the pilot input to be able to do it cooperatively. I think that that's what's important, is we'll keep pace of that because we have to use the data so that we can actually continue to further enhance and put in safety enhancing equipment. And I think that we've seen that as we've seen GPWS, which everyone knows about now, TCAS, when those are being certified in the organization 30 years ago when I was there, those were like, well, that's going to be new, how are we going to do it? We're going to have to be involved in every one of those programs. And now we do it, and it's not even a significant issue. So I think that you see that we've got the ability to be able to take data, learn, continue to monitor, and be able to evolve, to be able to allow for new entrants and new applications and new technology to come in safely.
All right, question from the audience. Identify yourself if you can.
Yeah, sorry, I'm Roddy Dennis. I actually think the prevalence of handheld devices, there is an actual positive to that because it's another data source. So of course there's a negative connotation of spinning of storage without all the information. But at the same time, I do think that both passengers and witnesses, that's another data source that you can look at to get to the truth of an issue. My question is actually about new technology. So one of the pillars of safety has always been about assurance. So we look at new policy that comes out, and I know the FAA have just published their strategy on artificial intelligence. What is the plan about being able to assure the use and the greater integration of artificial intelligence, where you necessarily, back in the day, you would have a facing software engineer who knew exactly what was inside that software package? How are we going to do it with AI when you can't definitively say, how did you get to the point that that answer was provided?
So it was interesting because I was on the FAA YASA panel just recently, more questions of it. And it was interesting because across it was actually industry plus a couple of the other authorities. Really AI, I think you got to be careful, it's not all the same with the Terminator AI that takes over and is learning and continuing. If you're going to use it in aviation, and certainly in the applications, it's going to be learned. And again, it's all about terminology. I'm not an expert in it, but I can understand well enough that you got to really understand the taxonomy. Everyone speaks to it the same. And when you say you're going to have autonomy or you're going to say you're going to have AI, you've got to be able to put it in reality what has been in the norm. And AI itself, if you end up developing, a manufacturer can decide, I'm going to develop this code, it's going to actually compute and take this data, and this is what it will do. If they're going to use it for certification, what will happen is it'll be validated as a model. It's just like using computer, computational fluid dynamics or the finite element modeling. Behind the scenes, everyone can develop a different code. I mean, math's math, pretty much. But what has to happen is it's static when it's used and it's validated. You validate that it will produce this result, you test it, it's the same result, you have correlation. That will be the same. So AI will be used and by the companies as they want to, but if it's used, it will still have to be certified as a validated tool, and it will be static. It will have to be, shown to prove.
Allison from Bloomberg.
Yes, member of the media here. So I get the point being made on, a lot of reporting around incidents and, sometimes people conflating manufacturing issues for maintenance issues, et cetera. But when it comes to the Boeing door plug accident, that very well could have been deadly. I think the thing that we see afterwards is obviously all of the, everything that's come out about safety culture still being an issue and quality lapses at the factories, inspections that should have been done not being done on certain aircraft. So are those issues being overblown? And I think the other comment we get sometimes is, why weren't the MAX crashes enough for those things to all have been fixed and addressed? Like, why is that still a persistent issue? And do you see that as being something that they can fix in the next couple of years?
Billy, why don't you take that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think, when we think about culture, we like to think that's just some sort of easy thing. You snap your fingers, you come out with this snazzy new, acronym or a new program, and you overlay it, and bam, you got culture. It just doesn't work that way, right? So it is something that any organization, from the FAA on down to airlines, et cetera, you've got to be able to think about what are our risks. And it's the ability to track risk from the time it emerges. From the time it emerges onto your call it on your radar, all the way till it's fully mitigated. And looking at what I think of as the life cycle of risk. So if I were to pick Boeing or Airbus or whomever, is that it is that ability to say, what are our risks? What happened? Why did this happen? You're making the case, right? It's fair in today's world, as connected as we are. When something happened, we are going to be concerned about it. That's just a fair human interaction. Our goal and our plan has to be, how do we then take that and put that in terms of saying, look, we're working, here's what our trends show, here's what our data shows, and here's what we are doing to concretely solve the situation in terms of our mitigation.
So let's go to from that. Go ahead, Robert.
Can it be fixed? It has to be fixed. The status quo is not going to cut it. Boeing can't sustain the way they're going.
So a long time ago, the phrase was, if it's not Boeing, I'm not going. And now people are trying to turn that on its head, right? If it's Boeing, I'm not going. I won't ask Robert, the head of Boeing's Aviation and Aerospace Safety Center, but I will ask Randy, has Boeing turned a corner? Have they learned a painful lesson? Do they have the right leadership in place now?
Everything I see says yes. They went pretty far down in the valley of self-respect as a corporation. it was tarnished. And the fact that they didn't get it just snap, turn around quick, it shows you how deep the problems were in that company. And I think they've done a good job. I think, I understand, I know some of the things they're doing to their new hires. You want to have safety, not something you're just going to pick up along the way every now and then. You're going to have a safety briefing. No, I want you to start every morning with a safety briefing. And everybody's got to be responsibility with cross pollination, if you would, of being safe. And that has to go through the whole corporation. You can't be independent. You know, the person who puts that last lug nut on, it's just as important as the bolt.
But is there a more systemic issue here, particularly with suppliers? We're not just seeing Boeing. If you look at the problems Pratt & Whitney's had with their powder, I mean, you're grounding airplanes for 350 days. You don't have a spare engine. You're causing economic losses in the millions. So is this a bigger issue in the entire industry in terms of supply chain oversight?
Well, you know, supply chain can be interrupted a lot of different ways. You have a strike in France or something and you don't get some part for the engine. You have a shortage of components, some mine collapsed somewhere else and we're not getting the chemicals out of the earth to make lithium batteries or whatever the issue is. A lot of things can interrupt the supply chain, but a lot of technology gets loose, and as it begins to develop and engines get 500, 5,000, we start noticing failures.
But have they sprinkled the supply chain too far, too varied, without adequate controls such that they really need to be taking it back in-house, like Boeing appears to be doing? Robert?
No, I was just going to comment. That's a good example right there, Boeing bringing Spirit back in-house. I mean, you look at a lot of organizations. Pratt & Whitney, for example, is very vertically oriented, integrated, and companies got away from that. But I think they're seeing that that's fraught with problems.
Go ahead, Lyra.
I was going to say, I think supplier control is a part of the overall system, and it really goes back to culture. I think, and it's also, I think one thing important to say is the demographics of the workforce. You know, we talked about it earlier, we've had a bump up in activity, and we had a period where a lot of experience has departed. And we have to transfer that knowledge. So I think there's just a number of factors that have been highlights to us, but I think our system has got so many overlapping areas that even the event that occurred, while it was very publicly out there, it was pretty traumatic because we haven't seen an event like that. I like to flip the side on it and say, it's a spotlight to say, where are the root cause issues? And when you take it all the way down and you've seen what Boeing has done, you've looked at all the root cause issues, it goes down to the percentages of experience versus non-experience, the training that was there, the transfer of knowledge, you know, things from even just shift times to other shift times. I think what's important is you go down to the root cause when you see that event, and I don't think that it's only Boeing, it's across the board. It's the volume of work that occurs. And so when you take the positive is really trying to say, what do we need to fix systemically? Culture is a big part of it. When you understand, when you're putting in something as a simple component, what it means to the overall safety, you have to understand that if you're working in aviation. And I think that's something that when you say gold standard of the FAA, it's really of our industry.
But isn't that the problem? We've had a lot of people come into the industry that don't have our same culture. Question from the audience here, that's rhetorical.
Good evening, I'm Gareth Dorr, previous military pilot in Europe and commercial, now flying in the US. And my question is, with the impressive safety record since Colgan Air and Public Law 111216, how much of that is attributable to the 1500-hour rule, and how much is the other factors such as mandating safety management systems, fatigue risk management, and crew duty rules, etc.?
I'll start with the 1500-hour rule. I'm not a fan. I can't attribute any of it to that rule, but I will attribute a lot of focus internally in terms of training and in terms of how we bring pilots onto the line today. All of those components have vastly improved. And when you look back at that accident, the lack of flight time was not an underlying issue at all. As a matter of fact, both of them had more than the rule called for. But what you did have was a pilot who had multiple times, not once or twice, 3 times been let loose from a carrier and failed to disclose it. So we fixed the pilot records, we fixed a lot of other things, and we fixed training, all of that going to it, and the safety record speaks for itself. There's a statistic that Peggy Gilbert used to throw out, that if we lost a hull at the same rate, and remember we're flying a lot more hulls today than we did then, but if we lost a hull at the same rate we were having in 1970, we would lose 17 hulls a year today in this country. So we have made dramatic progress forward.
And yet there's consensus in the aviation industry, I think, around what you said with the $1,500 rule, and yet Senator Schumer still will not oppose it and get rid of it because of the Colgan families. So let's talk about the families. We had a question over here.
Hi, I'm Philip Weissman. I think what some people say is what's the most dangerous is what you don't know. So I'm just wondering, with the introduction of new technology and new entrants into the industry, how do we combat issues of potential gray areas and loopholes and ensure that, that there's proper enforcement?
Yeah, I'll start. I go back to my earlier comment, which is around the ability to identify emerging risk, right? I mean, the old saying is, you've got known knowns, you've got known unknowns, you've got unknown unknowns. I don't think there are that many black swans out there. This is, you're talking about mechanical things and you're talking about newer technology, flyby, all of this. So there's a really, really good understanding. You look at how much data is coming off a Boeing or an Airbus today. It's an incredible amount. Our ability to sift through that data and see on the aircraft itself, that tells us how close it's getting to maybe a component failure. And on the same nature, you've got both qualitative and quantitative data from LOSAs to check ride data and all of that gives you kind of a sense of where do you have a training issue? Do you have an issue on the line? So I think we've gotten, I know we've gotten better, and it's reflected in the data.
Let's shift a little bit. We're talking a lot about commercial aviation. What about business aviation? What about general aviation? They're not one in 13.7 million, right? I don't even know if they're 1.79 million, right, that we saw before. And let's put somebody else on the spot that knows something. Chris. Identify yourself, sir.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Ken. Chris Rushlow. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the National Business Aviation Association and former colleagues of a number of the people on the stage today. So the question was essentially how safety matters in business aviation, general aviation. Clearly at Part 135, 91, not the same level as a 121, understand that. At the same time, as many of the people on the stage and many people in this room understand, that is a continual process. So using data, understanding what happens in a manufacturing process, all of that type of activity goes to making the system safe, right? Because when we start talking about GA, business aviation, commercial space launches, drone activity, advanced air mobility, all of these things have to fit in the system safely. And so that's why, certainly from a business aviation standpoint, and that's one of the things I do, is to make sure that we're coordinating with the NTSB, with the FAA, and obviously our members and our operators to make sure that that system stays safe.
Yeah, if you look at professionally flown two-pilot operations in a business environment, business jet environment, that record is almost comparable to that of the U.S. major carriers. Now, Chris, you're right. When we get into Part 135, and there are many good Part 135 operators out there. Part 91, loss of control claims is a factor in almost half of the GA fatalities, almost half. That's an area right there. If we could solve that nut right there, we would drive GA accidents down significantly.
Another question from the audience.
Looking at the Delta, Bill Stramberg, looking at the Delta situation recently with CrowdStrike and the Southwest and so on, do you folks see a potential threat or a risk involved in the commercial software that the airlines use, but yet impacts operations and I can think of in many cases where one or two big airlines go down, is that a safety impact to the system until they get up and running because of all of the pressures to handle rescheduling and impacts on air traffic control and everything. Is that part of something the FAA and should be looking at, or is that, well, the companies can do it, they'll take care of it, because a lot of their software is now antiquated?
Well, I will say I do think that airlines do a pretty good job on a global, certainly the major carriers do a good job in terms of, identifying risk, and certainly, software, you think about the things that impact your passenger, your PSS, your passenger reservation system. Your pilots today have an iPad, your flight attendants are using a Galaxy Note, they're using an iPhone. So we're certainly more connected. So what are those risks, and the ability to have a good strategy in place to combat that, to the extent that you've got some sort of interruption, how quickly, it is the ability to recover quickly, right, when you have something like that happen.
When is Archer going to fly? When is the FAA going to approve Archer to fly, and Joby to fly, and Beta to fly, and all these other 4-person, single-piloted things that are ready for production right now? Lirio?
I keep giving her the microphone and shoving it at her.
They'll be operating and flying once they have completed their certification. There's an iterative process that has to occur, and I think that all the applicants we have right now, or FAA has right now, are making good progress. But I think it's a process that now is really reliant on the applicant to be able to supply the data for the design that they proposed, and the FAA has provided the criteria for the most part at this point. So I think it's just going to be the process of getting through the certification, which we talked about earlier. It is not from this point to A and B, it is an iterative process back and forth. You define a design, you test that design, you validate that design, you reiterate that design if you see a fault that you want to rectify, and you go through the process again. There is no timeline until you've actually shown compliance.
Billy, are you frustrated with the pace, and do you believe that the FAA is bureaucratically throwing a roadblock and an impediment to innovation in this industry and allowing advanced air mobility to survive and thrive?
Oh, that's a lot of words there. Let me just say.
Say yes.
Yeah. What gets this industry is that, that you're seeing a lot of capital here, right? It takes about $1 billion plus to bring a product to market. And what you want to see is that level, and to Lirio's point, right, is the ability, what I want to have is the agencies that the energy matches the level of the industry, right? Safety will always be paramount. It's our ability to work and find a tempo, right? This is not just about the US, and I'm just going to put stuff, it is not just about the US. The world is moving, and others.
So are you going to fly in Dubai and UAE before you're going to fly in the United States?
Our hope is that we are flying in the US first, but it's a global issue.
Robert?
Yeah, but I think the FAA certainly has a responsibility as the regulatory authority. The traveling public is depending on them. I mean, that's really your client, is the traveling public. And so I'm going to defend the FAA on this one. They were caught with their pants down on the MAX situation, and they were criticized, and maybe rightfully so, maybe not. And so I think that they have to really slow down and make sure that this is being done right.
Is the air traffic management system ready to accommodate the entry of advanced air mobility in the United States? And let's ask the former head of safety oversight of air traffic management, Bill Voss.
Oh, thanks. I knew when we came over here. Yeah, all right, no, it's okay. Oh, I have to stand up? Okay, Joe says you have to stand up. I think it's underestimated. But first we have to go back and realize how much money is going to be moved over just to deal with infrastructure. The fact you've got buildings that are in excess of 50 years old is a standard. I mean, you can say you want to do a lot, but if it rains on the equipment, it ruins your day. And I think you can't ignore the fact that the trust fund's gone down. It is not in a place where you can do a lot of innovating, so I think that's going to be a pacing item when you talk about advanced air mobility.
Okay, could I just add that? Yeah. Look, I sit on the NASA Advisory Committee. NASA's been working on, dynamic DRF, dynamic reasoning fabric, that ability to think about how you overlay within our national airspace. How do you integrate new and novel technology, be it drones, be it, hundreds, thousands, millions, and thousands of eVTOL. So it is the ability, again, there's some brilliant minds, not only in this room, but certainly within the FAA, within NASA, within MITRE, around the world. I think this is a problem that we should be able to solve sooner rather than later.
All right, I just asked in a preliminary fashion the United States Department of Justice if they wish to comment on the growing criminalization of the aviation accident system, and they politely declined. So I'm going to ask you, Robert, aren't you concerned about this whole hoo-ha of the victims' families going after Boeing criminally to open it up and get them to plead guilty to fraud, even though justice found there was no management direction, there was no evidence of that? Are you concerned? I thought with ValueJet and SaberTech, we were kind of done with criminalization in this country and leave it to France to do that. Are you worried about the foreboding of criminalization having a chilling effect on people cooperating with NTSB investigations and FAA actions, sir?
Well, there's a couple of different things to unpack there. So on the first part, I plead the fifth. You know, am I going to weigh in on what goes on in the criminal justice system? And no. But should families be involved in NTSB investigations? And when Congress set up the NTSB through the enabling legislation, Congress designed the party system to allow organizations, entities that have technical expertise to bring to the investigation. Congress authorized that, and the families get offended when you say, well, you don't have technical expertise. They say, yeah, but we do. But the whole purpose is to, if you really have a question about a Boeing airplane or a Tesla car, who I happened to kick Elon off of an investigation once. But you know, which I didn't say that, but
strike that from the record.
No, keep that on the record.
All right.
But you know, it's to bring technical expertise in, and that's the purpose of the parties. It's not to sort out litigation matters. There's a time and a place for that, but I think an NTSB investigation is not that time and a place. There is a time and a place in litigation, but anyway.
Let's take another audience question.
Hi, Hannah Duke. Could you talk a little bit about the relationship between FAA and EASA and other international regulators, please?
Yeah, so I think it's a good, strong working relationship. What we saw, certainly during my time as acting administrator, I think I probably met with 75 director generals from around the world, and there's overall a sense of how you work together. If you were to call some preeminent, if you will, let's just say the top four, right? And I hope no one will take offense to that, but you got the FAA, you got AMAC in Brazil, you got Transport Canada, you've got EASA, right? But you've got a whole host of others, JCAB, you name it, and they're there. So the ability to come together. I was at an ICAO conference 3 months ago where you've got 193 member states. So there is this work that's ongoing. I take to heart Administrator Whitaker's comments during the FAA EASA summit that took place just a couple of months ago, along with Florian Guillermet, the executive director of EASA, is that ability to come together work. We want to have as harmonized a regulatory structure as we can, right? That ability to say, you can take this product and fly it anywhere without having some sort of onerous requirements as you cross sort of lines, right? I think our ability to get there, it's still a work in action. It's a work in progress, but it's getting better.
All right, we're on final approach. Cultural issues. My friend Steve Atkins used to head safety at Boeing. You guys, a lot of you know them well. He said, how do we attract new talent into this industry when they're going after AI? All the engineers are going to other places, or they're going to AAM. They're not going into traditional business aviation, general aviation. You go out to Manassas and fly, and you're on a 172 that's 50 years old. How do we make aviation sexy again? Is what he is.
I'm not worried about that. Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University classes started 3 days ago. We have record enrollment. We're turning students away. So I'm not worried about that.
I actually think that what we saw before is it wasn't as sexy, and I think it's coming back. My granddaughter just told me last week she decided she wants to be a pilot, so I'm ecstatic. But I think, yeah, and it's right, and I'm trying to brainwash my daughters to be engineers. But I think that you had a period of time where it was more about, I want to build computer science so I can do an app. It's the services, and I think there is a turn back now to the value of actually doing something and building something. So there was that gap, which goes to the whole root cause of feeding our system, the pipeline of people. I don't think even within the FAA, we were at the right level 20 years ago. We were looking at high school students, and we realized since then you have to be at the middle school level where you're influencing them through a rocket contest, engagement in real life design challenge. And there's so many activities right now that when you put children who have an opportunity to touch, feel hardware, learn, use that brain, they'll go into engineering and they're going to be able to feed the pipeline for the future. I think there was a period of time when it just wasn't the accessibility. I'll be honest too. You know, there was never as many air shows. You know, there's a lot of liability. Air shows went away, and that was where you had the exposure, and then you got to see and feel and hear and get engaged. My daughters went to Oshkosh 2 years ago, and they were astounded with what's there. And you see the safety, interest, and I think that's what it is. You got to be in that environment to feel that culture, to feel it, to live it, and then you get exposed. I think Oshkosh is a great experience if no one has been there. Start from the ground up. It just gives you that feeling, and you've got to encourage people to go. And I think as well, you know, when there's air shows and activities for hands-on, that's the type of thing that will feed the pipeline that I think we've gotten away from a period of time. And I think it's coming back. I would give credit. I think the AAM, this new technology, is bringing it back. It's making it look like.
But aren't you worried, Randy, that cultural issues like this, I mean, it's great, it's inspirational, no better place than Oshkosh, and the beer and brats are fantastic, but that there's a cultural clash of move fast and break things in Silicon Valley and 10 to the minus 9 in commercial aviation.
Well, I was only going to echo on the issue of Oshkosh. My youngest granddaughter, one of 6, she went to Oshkosh 4 years ago for the first time. She now has a private pilot's license, and she's an A&P mechanic. Hey. It works. What she was exposed to, and she still talks about it. But yeah, there is that culture, but aviation has had its own center line for a long time. There's going to be people that are going to be fascinated with computers and AI, and you know, I'm going to play chess against Watson and beat him, and you know, all that stuff. But there's other people that get just as big a kick out of going for an hour ride in a Cessna 172. And how do you get them introduced to that? And of course, institutions, you know, like Roberts. By the way, I did solo in Embry-Riddle 4,000 years ago. But you know, those schools, and I sit on the Aviation Abbey accreditation board, 70 different schools, and they pound on safety, and they pound on exposure, and they pound on, you know, making sure that everybody is included culturally, and it's important.
What a wonderful, inspirational way of wrapping up a talk by a fantastic group. Please join me in thanking this panel.
Well done. For those of you that did not have Kim put a microphone in your face, you can now breathe a sigh of relief.